Stephan Pastis, Looking Up. Chapter 7. Rubble, rubble, your town is a mess. I was so shocked and disoriented by the news about punches that I walked all the way home and forgot to take off my mask. And it wasn't just the loss of the toy store that was shocking. It was the loss of Muffins. Muffins, who I somehow knew I would never see again, which leads me to a question I would someday like an answer to. Where do people you've known go after they're gone? My guess is that they all gather in the same spot somewhere and probably have a party, but you never get invited. So that makes it hurt all the more. And that makes me think you should never get too close to anyone because they'll just leave and go to that party that you can't attend. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that after leaving Old Lady Trifaldi's, I didn't know what to do. Part of me was hoping that Trevor's father was wrong and that I just needed to go to Punches and find out for myself. But I couldn't, because I knew that if I walked past it and saw a heap of rubble, I would fall right down like that building and cry for the rest of my life. Plus, I knew he wasn't wrong, because the same thing that had apparently happened to Punches was happening throughout our town, and it happened to every old home on my block, which one by one went up for sale and one by one disappeared, except for ours, which now stood like a structural orphan in a sea of weeds. It was like the entire town I loved and the people I loved were disappearing right before my eyes, replaced by new things and new people, none of which I liked half as much as the old. Which raised another question. Why is everyone so eager to replace the past with the present? Because if you want to know the truth, I'd rather make time move backward than forward and leave the whole present out of it. For the present left me too sad to cry, and unsure of what to do next. Because normally when I was this down, I would go to the shelf in my bedroom where I kept the nights and see to it that a few more dragons expired. Failed to floss daily. But this was much worse. And so I did the only thing I could do when faced with a situation so dire. I held a pity party in my closet with my piñatas. And though their hearts were filled with candy and mine with sadness, together we were a band of brothers, who, as the town tightened its grip around us, tightened our grip around each other. Because in the end, it was all about what I had said to my mother, that in the short time between promises and the future, the sky can fall, which had now happened, to the one place I loved more than anywhere else on earth. And so I sat in my closet with my piñatas, resigned to both my town's fate and my own, ready for the wrecking ball that had tolled for Punches to soon toll for us, when I was suddenly saved by Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes. Chapter 8. Sign of the Times. It's hard to believe I've told you this much about me while barely even mentioning my life partner, Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes. Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes. Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes is a painted turtle that I found in a dry creek bed. I originally named him Rocks, due to the fact that he is so antisocial, he rarely emerges from his shell, thereby making him look more like a rock than a reptile. More like a rock. But he was insulted by the name, which he called jejune, a word I do not know that you will just have to look up for yourself. And don't ask me why he wanted to be called Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes either. Because all I know is that Rutherford B. Hayes was the 19th President of the United States, had a very long beard, and was, to the best of my knowledge, not a doctor. Rutherford B. Hayes, very long beard, not a doctor. In any event, the reason I think of him as a life partner and not as a pet is that he bears none of the hallmarks of a pet. For Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes will not fetch, snuggle, guard the house, do tricks, or jog beside you on a leash. All of which might cause you to ask why I wanted him to be my life partner in the first place, and that was because of his wisdom. For Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes knows 381,434 of the 470,874 entries in Webster's Third New International Dictionary, which I know because I asked. And he was only too happy to answer, for if Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes has any fault at all, it is that he can sometimes be arrogant, which I pointed out only once, after which he called me a name I did not understand, but presumed to be horrific. And so I made it a rule to never point out his shortcomings, and instead accept him for the brilliant counselor that he is. And thus, when he would climb upon the rock at the top of his aquarium known as Plato's Profound Perch, his term, not mine, I would listen. Plato's Profound Perch. And when I told him about Punches and explained that I didn't know where to turn next, he gave me his advice, and that advice was one word. Chance. As in Daniel Chance McGibbons. But just like with the big words he used, I did not understand. And so he explained that the same thing that had happened on our side of the street had happened on Daniel's side of the street as well. Each of the houses around him had been bought and torn down, leaving his house as the lone one still standing. And thus my turtle realized in all his wisdom that Daniel and I were fated to be natural allies. For in a battle like this, two were better than one. And while I couldn't save Punches, I could take all the anger I now had inside me and do something with it by working with Daniel to at least save that which was still left, like his house and mine, which to me seemed like just about the smartest idea anyone ever had, except for one small detail. Daniel loathed me like a disease. For despite my good intentions, my only interactions with him had involved the splattering of his artwork with egg yolk and the theft of his birthday piñata. And so I sat by my bedroom window, staring out toward his house for hours on end, hopeless as could be, but secretly wishing that he would somehow see the wisdom of our super duo pairing on his own. Which, of course, didn't happen. And I know what you're saying. Maybe that was because Daniel was fine with the whole town changing. Maybe he didn't care about the homes on our block. Maybe he didn't care about punches. To which I say, absurd! And also, that was a distinct possibility. Because the truth was I didn't know how Daniel felt, for I had been too busy throwing eggs at him to inquire. I could only hope that one day there would be some change in his circumstance that might affect him the way the loss of punches had me. And then one day there was, in the form of a sign. Not from the gods, but a real estate office, stuck right there in his yard. For sale. Chapter 9. Night Sweats. Isn't it odd how sometimes you feel really bad and then you wake up the next morning and it's like you're a whole different person? Well, that was me the next day. In fact, I was so happy, I even resuscitated a few dragons. You get a new life, and you get a new life, and you get a new life. For I knew I finally had my opportunity to approach Daniel, but as much as I wanted to sprint across the street immediately, I knew I had to be smart about it. Because given what I had done to him so far, there was no reason for him to talk to me, much less trust me. And that's when it hit me. The way to change all that. To convince him that I was a person he could not only trust, but admire, and using an abundance of cardboard I had purchased from Tippy's Piñata Paradise to save it from becoming piñatas, as well as some flair from old Lady Trifaldi, I fashioned the appropriate outfit, and boldly knocked at Daniel's door. But no one answered. Which maybe is why knights rarely knocked, but instead bashed down doors, and waiting there on the porch under the hot sun, I became aware that the biggest threat to a knight was not a sword to the heart, but the heat inside cardboard. And so I took off my helmet, which had not been kind to my soft, malleable hair, and that's when the door opened, and I looked like this. Now, in all my books about knights, this was the moment when the damsel in distress usually fainted with joy, and the knight caught her and carried her far away from the giants or the dragons or whatever horrible thing was after her, after which she'd wake up and wrap her long arms around his neck and say, "Ye are my hero!" But instead Daniel said, "Oh God, it's you." And I replied by saying something very awkward, which in retrospect probably did not have to be uttered in medieval English. "Thou hast permit my entry across ye drawbridge?" "Why are you here?" he asked. "To save us both." "From what?" "Ye are my Daniel in distress." "I don't get it." "It doesn't matter," I said. "The point is that I'm a knight." "Okay. That means you can trust me." "To do what?" "The right thing." And then he paused, no doubt contemplating just what to say in a moment as grand as this, which turned out to be, no offense, but I'm gonna go back inside now. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever somebody says no offense, the next thing they say is always offensive. And leaving me to die of sunstroke was at least a tad bit offensive. "Wait," I said before he could shut the door. "I'm really hot. Can I at least have a glass of water?" And though he didn't say I could come inside, neither did he say no. Instead, he just sighed and walked back into the house, leaving the front door open, which I took as an invitation to cross the non-existent drawbridge. After which, Daniel led me through empty rooms to the kitchen, where he took the lone glass left in the cupboard, filled it with tap water, and offered it to me, which, if you ask me, was pretty darn kind for a Daniel in distress. Though I couldn't help noticing the glass on which was the chipped image of a cat and the cheesy sentence, "Cat, stop loving you." It was the kind of corny, back-of-the-cupboard glass you only use when all the others are in the dishwasher, or when "We're moving," he said. "Everything's all packed up, including the cups." And there was something so vulnerable about him saying it that I wanted to hug his beautifully round face right there. But nowhere in my nightbooks did anyone hug anyone, probably due to all that armor. And I had already made such a bad impression with my cube-shaped hair and medieval dialect that I didn't want to worsen things. "So, what are you supposed to be saving me from?" he asked, which was just the opening I'd been waiting for. And so I handed him the speech Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes had dictated to me. It was specifically designed to stir men's souls, but it used too many big words, and so I had to translate it in the margins. From the brilliant mind of Dr. Rutherford B. Hayes. Sometimes the plaintive cry of life is unbearable, seizing you in its vice-like tentacles with a merciless fervor born of menace. Life bad. It is in those solitary days that one must find solace, in the knowledge that all the edifices of our dreams were constructed not by the pusillanimous, but by forebearers who showed no forbearance. No idea. Indeed, those forebearers strove for an incandescent glory that was almost transcendent, mindful that you, their heir, would one day be its beneficiary. Someone did something. "None of this makes any sense," he said. "Also, why are you dressed like a knight?" And I wanted to tell him all about what was happening in the neighborhood, and with Punch's toy farm, and Mrs. Trifaldi's house, and now his house, and how I was dressed as a knight because knights save people from harm, and I wanted to save him from harm, not to mention me from harm, and I wanted to apologize for the piñata, and egg yolk, and just about everything else, but each of those thoughts raced from my mouth all at once, and my words got bottled up like cars on a rush hour freeway, and what came out of my mouth next was undoubtedly the most awkward, nonsensical, grammatically incorrect thing that anyone has ever said in the history of time, which was this: "Me love your round face, thanks." It was at that point I became so mortified that I grabbed my knight's helmet and put it back on my head in the faint hope that if I covered my face quickly enough, he might forget who I was. But he didn't. Instead, he made it 1,000,000,000 times worse. "Is that why you're always staring at our house?" And right then, I wanted to jump into the non-existent moat that surrounded Daniel's dwelling and either float away or drown, because that's about the most humiliating thing a person can ever ask you, and it caught me so off guard that before I knew it, I was making a claim so outrageous that even I couldn't predict it. If you must know, I work part-time with the police department doing neighborhood watch. Only it was even worse than that, because I was so flustered I began the sentence by saying, "If ye must know," but then he didn't say anything at all, and that made me even more nervous. So then I blurted out this: "You'll be happy to know that your house is secure," and this: "Does it really seem like I stare at you all the time?" and this: "I normally do not sweat like a pig in mittens." It was a display so inept that I half hoped the police would come and arrest me for the stolen piñata. But they didn't. And all I could think was how dumb it was for me to even hope I could save Daniel, for maybe he liked the thought of moving, and maybe he liked the cat glass, and maybe he just wanted the girl who had run off with his piñata to stop injecting her square head into his otherwise okay life, and so I rose to leave. And that was the moment he dropped his head into his hands and said, "I don't want to leave this house." And that, Daniel, I could save.